CPI is actually calculated. So basically, what is the CPI? The CPI is actually a global 180 countries aggregate index using 13 different data sources. And so obviously it means that secondary data. So this is not primary research. Capturing perception of experts, business people of corruption, perception of corruption, which means that abuses of power for private gain in the public sector. So this must be very clear. We keep getting questions every year. What about private sector? The CPI does not measure corruption in the private sector. It measures corruption in the public sector. Of course, for corruption to happen in the public sector, definitely the private sector has a role to play, either as a giver, mainly as a giver. All right, so that's what CPI is all about. Okay, what does it measure? The CPI measures bribery, diversion of public funds, enforcement of integrity mechanism, commitment to fight corruption. This is very important. If the government is not committed to fight corruption, we can do anything, we can talk about it, we can advocate, by the end of the day, nothing will happen. And this is exactly what's happening in Malaysia. Restriction of freedom of expression, all right? Freedom of expression is one of the measurements. Use of public office for private gain, CSO's access to information. So it is measured throughout the world. What is the space given for civil society organization to get information? State capture. State capture, for those of you who are not familiar, it's basically about related to private companies or private sector who actually controls the government. So this actually links back to political corruption, you know, giving huge funding during election period. But in return, when the government comes into power, these companies actually practically control the government. Prosecution of corrupt officials, excessive red tape or bureaucracy, legislation on financial disclosure. Do we have enough legislation for that? Or legal protection for whistleblowers. Malaysia is one of the few countries who has a specific law on whistleblower. Later we'll talk about it, but there are gaps that need to be addressed. Now, what does the CPI does not measure? CPI does not measure citizens' perception or experience on corruption, meaning it doesn't measure perception of individuals. In other words, it doesn't go to the streets and ask an individual or Malaysians what is your perception on corruption. Okay, so the CPI doesn't measure that. Tax fraud, illicit financial flows, enablers of corruption. So enablers of corruption can be professionals, can be government officials facilitating corruption to happen. Money laundering, so it doesn't measure money laundering. Any type of private sector corruption or informal economies or markets, all right? So the green one is actually those that the CPI uses for measurement. Survey sources, there are 13 different survey sources, including the World Bank, Freedom House, World Justice Project, and so on. One of the rules of the CPI is minimum every country must have 3 sources. Anything below than that, you won't be considered to enter the CPI measure. All right, so minimum there must be 3 surveys. So in Malaysia's case, there were 9 surveys. Because some surveys like African Development Bank, they don't do much work in this region. So those organizations don't have any assessment. Briefly on the methodology, once these sources of data are obtained, what TI does is rescale and standardize data sources. Now, what do I mean by this? When the data comes in, because some of these surveys, they may be measured in a Likert scale of 1 to 5, 0 to 100, 1 to 10. So if you compile all these figures, you cannot, how do you compare them? You cannot compare. So what TI does is they do a rescaling to 0 to 100. They calculate an average, a simple average, and report on uncertainty. So this kind of assessment, you don't have like margin of error and things like that, because you are basically taking secondary data. Okay, the global theme this year is conflict, peace, and security. Later I will explain to you the link of this team and link with the corruption perception index. Later I will explain that. But corruption can undermine political, social and economic stability, ultimately threaten peace, safety and security as a whole. Corruption also creates a fertile ground for organized criminal activities, even terrorism, as criminals are aided in their illegal activities by the complicit of corrupt public officials. And this even in Malaysia, we are already seeing it. Example, foreigners coming into the country, when some major issues surface, there are no records in immigration that they have actually come in. That is an example of how peace and security can be a threat with corruption. Okay, let's come to the results now, which all of you are waiting. Now, first, let me give you the regional averages. Now, as you can see, just like every year, Western Europe and the EU, they do well. But even then, you can see the average scores are slowly deteriorating. Second group is in the Asia Pacific region. We have 45% score. Of course, we are the second best in among the globally, region-wise. And that's partially because New Zealand have done very well, and Singapore also do very well. So they are in the top 10. So because of that, they pull up the score. But at the same time, you have people like North Korea, who scores only 17 out of 100. And that drags down Asia Pacific's result. Right? And of course, you can see other countries, even Eastern Europe, Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Americas, they are all not doing well. Okay, top 10 countries. This is 2022. Huh? Top 10 countries in the world. Denmark. In fact, Denmark has improved compared to last year. Last year, 88 points. This year, they got 90 points. So Denmark is doing very well. Followed by Finland. Followed by New Zealand. Finland and New Zealand, they tie. So there is no third place. Fourth place is Norway. Fifth is Singapore. 6 is Sweden. 7 is Switzerland. 8 is Netherlands. Germany 9, and Luxembourg is the 10th position. So mainly dominated by the EU countries and Western Europe. And Singapore is the only Asian country to make it among the top 10. Now, I can tell you something about Singapore. Every year when the CPI scores drop even 1 point, the Singapore Prime Minister takes it very seriously and he wants to know what happened. So that is a kind of commitment the country's leadership should show. Now, let me take you through to the bottom 10 countries. I mean, some of these countries, there are no law and order. So just now remember the theme, I say conflict, peace and security. They are all linked to CPI. Unfortunately, many Islamic countries, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, Libya, they are also in this category, unfortunately. And you can see, you know, that is when there is conflict in the country, there is war, there is civil war, no political stability, this is what will happen. So that's a learning, learning for us, that we must make sure there is political stability and growth. Now, let me take you through to the results that you are waiting for, the scores. Now, these scores are based on 0 to 100. I just want to emphasize one thing. Many of you will ask about the ranking. Yeah, there is ranking. But in the CPI, we must focus on the score. The reason for that is some countries drop out and drop in because of the criteria of minimum 3 surveys. So sometimes your ranking can go up or go down, but that doesn't mean anything. Yet what is more important, focus on the score, the trend. And that will tell you whether the country is improving or not. Okay? So 100 is very clean, 0 is highly corrupt. All right? Now, let's look at Malaysia. We take you from 2019, many of you will remember. I was sitting here, many of you could have attended, where our score bounced up from 47, we went up to 53 because at that time there was a change in government in 2018 and there were a lot of reforms were coming in place. But subsequently, the scores start dropping. Okay, maybe probably because the promises made were not fulfilled. And also, if you all remember, 2020 there was this Sheraton move, and the PH government collapsed, and the reform agenda all was stopped. Then we came to 2021, dropped further, all right, to 48 points. So what is for 2022, which you are waiting? Sadly, we go down again. Okay, although we may say we go down 1 point below from 2021, but it's not a good sign. It just reflects that we are moving in the wrong direction again. So it's very important, and you can see there is a significant drop. If you compare over 3 years, 6 points is a very significant drop. Statistically very significant. Okay. So this is the overall chart of showing the scores. All right, and Malaysia's score is 47, and we are even below country like Namibia, country like Rwanda, you know, and that is not on. You know, we have to turn around this curve and move Malaysia up. So that is where we are. Now, we look at the sources, how they score. I just mentioned we have 9 sources, and the 9 sources are shown in the slide here. Another important thing I need to tell you is the CPI is measured over 2 years. In other words, the source of the information that we obtain is over a period of 2 years. So what we get in 2022 is from 2022 and 2021. So anything that is being done in 2023, you only really see the result end of 2024 or maybe 2025 early, you can see the results. So it can take about 2 years, all right? So you can see from this score, the first 3 there's no change, but the significant change drop is number 7, World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey, -7 points. And just for your information, I've just picked up one of the questions that, for your info, because you may be wondering why we dropped 7 points from this particular survey, the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Research. The question is, in your country, how common is it for firms to make undocumented extra payments or bribes connected with the following: import and export, public utilities, annual tax payments, awarding of public contracts and licenses, and obtaining favorable judicial decisions? So these were the type of questions being asked to the respondent in this survey, right? So it looks like many have actually marked very low score for Malaysia, right? So just to give you an example. Okay, now we do a bit of analysis. Now this is analysis among ASEAN countries. Comparison between 2022 and 2021. You can see Malaysia, we dropped by 1 point. Now you see the rank in the case of Malaysia, we have gone up by 1 step, right? But as I said, we shouldn't be too happy with this rank, because that is because some countries drop out and some countries are added in. So that's the reason. And you can see overall, even Indonesia is not doing well for the last year. Myanmar is, of course, not doing well. Even Singapore has dropped. So I believe they have a lot of answering to do when the results are announced to the Prime Minister in Singapore. Okay, let's look at this curve. I used to show this every year. And if you go back to history 2012, the reason the assessment is done from 2012 doesn't mean that there was no CPI before 2012. There was. But the methodology changed in 2012. So you cannot compare before that. So that's the reason why whatever data is being presented is for the last 11 years. So, those days when you had Pemandu, there were a lot of money pumping, a lot of programs in 2011, 2012, 2013. There was an improvement until the 1MDB issue surfaced. We went down to 47. G14 happened, big bang, reforms, institutional reforms, arrest of high profile people and so on. And then the NACP was launched, the National Anti-Corruption Plan, which is a very good plan. And then we scored 53. Then you had this change of government, post-Sheraton move. And then again, there was a change in government because of power play. You know, they just want to pull one government and replace another government, which they call backdoor government. And it went down, and until G15, now we are at 47. So what it basically means, we are back to square one. What we were in 2018, we are back there 4 years ago. All the money spent, all the time spent, all the effort put by many, including government officials, GICC, MACC, civil society, I would say wasted. You know, so I think there has to be a learning, and we are giving several recommendations and so on, because the drop is very significant. Drop is very significant. So statistically significant is countries 56 with significant changes since 2012. 25 countries positive, that means it improved. 31 countries, the scores came down. So Malaysia is unfortunately among the 31. Under Asia Pacific, among the 6 countries which has dropped by about 19% the score. Now let me show you this chart. This chart shows you the significant, statistically significant changes. Now you can see other countries as well. Now you look at Malaysia, 6 points, we dropped from 53 points in 2019, and now we are 47 points. So 6 points is very significant. Look at the UK. The UK were doing very well in 2018. They were almost about bordering 80 points. And today they have dropped 7 points. And that explains probably because you have an unstable government in the UK, the Conservative government is not stable over there, and at the same time, focus is not there on fighting corruption and so on. So that's the reason why this is happening. So it's very important that political stability is very important. Now, as I promised you, I want to show you this based on our theme, corruption makes security threats more likely. Now, first I want to draw your attention, for those who are interested, the source that you look for is Fund for Peace Fragile States Index. You Google, you can find it, okay? Malaysia is inside there. So there is in the y-axis, there is a measure for security apparatus. The security apparatus indicator considers the security threat to a state, such as bombings, attacks, and battle-related death, rebel movements, mutinies, coups, or terrorism. It also takes into account serious criminal factors such as organized crime, homicides, and perceived trust of citizens in domestic security. So what this chart shows is plotted against the CPI score, and you see this regression where there is a clear indication that when your scores are bad, then you find that the threat is there, security threat is there, all right? So Malaysia is somewhere there. So this is a big concern, all right? So basically this chart is showing that, you know, we got to do well. When we score better in the CPI, automatically, because the CPI doesn't measure only corruption, remember I gave you a lot of what it does measure. It measures about commitment of the government for reforms, new legislative changes and things like that, all right? Now another link correlation, corruption makes crime response harder. So in the x-axis is the CPI score, and in the y-axis is the Global Organized Crime Index resilience score. What is resilience score? Represents the political, legal, and economic and social spheres of society that when taken together have the potential to provide holistic and effective response to organized crime. The higher the resilience score, the more effective response to crime. So this is how we have seen the correlation, and Malaysia is right there. All right, so that's why it's important to improve our score. All right, now reasons for the poor score. Number one, lack of political will in fighting institutional corruption. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as you all know, there were a lot of stimulus package being rolled out without parliamentary debate and scrutiny. Patronage in appointing unqualified people or politicians to head GLCs and GLICs. reluctance to firmly address cost overruns in the littoral combat ship. Now, this littoral combat ship, LCS, is something we have been harping for the last 3 years, telling the government, be transparent, and so on. Now, even though under the new unity government, the new defense minister has said that we have to move on, next year the first ship is coming, and yesterday's news says that out of 6 ships, 5 ships are coming, but no details. If you, from 6 you become 5, we have already paid 6 billion out of 9 billion. Is there any reduction in the cost? Not explained. You see? So we need more transparency. Government must come forward and explain what actually happened. Now that's one. The other very important thing, which we agree with the minister that we need these assets for our military. Our shores must be protected. We agree with that. We support him. But what we are concerned is he did not talk about the past. We are not here interested about punishing people. That one, let the enforcement people. If corruption is involved, MACC will know how to handle it. What we are saying here, what actually triggered this whole LCS fiasco? Why did it happen? If you don't investigate and come up with maybe an RCI or a white paper or something like that, then where is the learning? As the Prime Minister said, he saw the Auditor General's report, which I'll also talk about it. The problems in various agencies and ministries are repeated. This year, 1.5 billion is lost in this ministry. Next year, another ministry. The following year, another ministry. Bila kita nak belajar? When are we going to learn? So this LCS issue is important for a learning, a very simple thing, part of project management. How is it that civil servants who were in charge in MINDEF didn't know that a project was being delayed? Why were red flags not raised? Why was it not highlighted? Why, when the project was, you had a cost overrun, no controls were put in? Why, when the project was delayed, exceeded the timeline, why was liquidated ascertained damages, we call it LAD, issued? So a lot of questions are not answered. So by just saying that let's move on, I think that's not correct. So if you continue, Malaysia, if you continue to say let's move on and forget about what has happened, then you don't expect the score to improve. Trust me, next year we'll be talking about the same thing. You know, benda ni bukan susah, clear cut in front of us, how to solve the problem. So when you say good governance, transparency, integrity, admit, look, we screwed it up. Tell the Rakyat we are sorry. We screwed it up. We will correct it. These are the problems that happen. We will make sure it won't happen again. These are the controls. I haven't heard this yet. All right. So the message that I want to give to the Minister of Defense is that, well, we support you on the vessel. We need the vessel to national security is important. But please don't ignore what had actually happened. Because if you do that, trust me, 2 years down the road, we'll be sitting here talking about another scandal in another agency or ministry. Okay? So, so that is an LCS, and I've mentioned about the Auditor General's report. Please read the Auditor General's report. It's available in the website once it's published. Please read it. When you read it, you get, as a Rakyat, you should feel so frustrated. I read it, and I feel very frustrated because these are taxpayers' money. And people just spend, and you just, year after year, there is leakages. All right? Lack of action against public officials found to have abused their position, like in the LCS case, or slow implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Plan. The National Anti-Corruption Plan is a beautiful document. It's a 5-year plan. What I understand from GICC, the last announcement, they only have covered 33%. Maybe it's slightly higher now. Now, come 5 years have passed, we only have done 33%. Who is the custodian for this? All right? So I hope this can be rectified. Now, the other thing is institutional reforms have stalled. Last 4 governments have failed to table the political financing bill. During Barisan Nasional, they came up with a draft, but not shared with the civil society and so on. Pakatan Harapan came, they say we are going to table the political financing bill in March 2020. Government collapsed, out. Under the last 2 governments, after a lot of pestering, in fact, the civil society and Bar Council and Ideas and C4, TI draft bill, we drafted the bill for them. And that time the law minister said will be tabled in October 26 or something like that. By then the announcement was made for Parliament to be dissolved. Gone. So nothing happened. So we hope under this unity government this will be done. IPCMC bill revised. The bill has been passed in Parliament to a toothless bill in called IPCC. No progress reforms to MACC, which we recommended to make it independent and report to Parliament. Slow progress on amendments of Whistleblower Protection Act bill, Protection Act 2010. This is a low-hanging fruit. And this message I want to send to the Law Minister, Dr. Sri Azalina, and who is also for institutional reforms. I know she was looking at the separation of power between the AG and the public prosecutor. Good, we support you. Tapi, go for the low-hanging fruits first. This amendment to the Whistleblower Protection Act, we have attended workshops after workshops after workshop with MACC, GICC, TI, other C4 and everybody giving recommendations after recommendation. Get it going now, you know. So this amendment, there are few issues, touchy issues, but let's sort it out and get it amended and go on. So that is how it should be. Huh? So we still hanging there. Government procurement bill yet to be tabled. This was promised by the former finance minister Lim Guan Eng that a government procurement bill will be tabled. Nothing happened after that. Okay. Separation of power, I just mentioned. Minister is looking at it. But of course, I know, I must be clear. Do not expect legislative changes to happen in 1 year. It can take long. We have experienced this. People discuss, debate, and then go to cabinet paper. From there, go to the parliament. Lawmakers will say, I want amendment here, amendment there, and so on. So this is a challenge. But I think time has come that lawmakers have to understand that, you know, without reforms, we cannot go anywhere. Now, of course, there are other positive developments. We must be fair. The SRC case, as you all know, there was a conviction at the federal court, and that demonstrates that the judiciary is independent. That's a good positive development. The other thing, if you all remember the MOU, or what do you call supply agreement between the PN government and Pakatan Harapan, they signed. And among these were the passing of the 18-year-old for voting, only 18, which was done. Okay, in the last election we saw the 18-year-old could vote. So that change took place, very positive. Anti-hopping law, another positive. That is probably the reason why individual lawmakers are very careful from jumping. They may be able to jump en bloc, but individuals, if they jump, they will lose their seats. So at least that law has been passed. And this is good. Through bipartisanship in Parliament, this was passed. Substantial improvements have been achieved in the MA 63. To be fair to the previous government, they also did their part by making some amendments to the constitution. And in 2022, with the new government, and even now under Dr. Sri Anwar, he's pushing very hard to get MA 63 done. Okay, Malaysia Agreement 63, particularly with Sabah and Sarawak. So inshallah, by end of this year, the MA 63 will be done. Two others still pending is the tenure of office for the PM. It was proposed for 10 years. This has not, nothing has moved, and parliamentary reforms. This also has not taken place. We hope under the unity government this will work. Other positive announcement by the Prime Minister, he talks about good governance, fighting corruption, judicial independence are identified as core issues. Very good. Mandatory competitive bidding for procurement contracts. So credit should be given when he took over the finance ministry, especially for the floods mitigation program. There were direct negotiations done, and he put a stop to it to relook at it. And if his figures are correct, 1.8 billion ringgit was saved just by renegotiating. So can you imagine what is the potential for savings if you do it properly through a proper tendering process? A review of certain high value projects, address the issues. I repeat again, please address the issues of the Auditor General's report. So I think the Prime Minister has given this to the various ministries. Various ministers are responsible to look at the audit report. And this is basic. I'm very surprised that previous ministers don't even look at the audit report. If you are talking about private sector, when you have an adverse audit report, you are head of department, you are given the audit report, within 2-3 months you have to report to senior management what are the rectification action you have taken. If you don't have, you will be in trouble if you don't do it. So I hope our ministers do something about it. So good governance and corrupt-free Malaysia is important for foreign investors' confidence. Our recommendations, first of all, the Official Secret Act. We have repeating this, we have said it in the past years. Narrow the scope of the Official Secret Act so that matters of public interest can be released and only matters related to national security are protected. Share information transparently, including uploading data on public contracts and supporting documents. Provide regular updates on the status of pending high-profile corruption cases. Monitor implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Plan and disclose progress via a public dashboard. We hope this can be done. I mean, no need for the public to ask how many % has been concluded and so on. Have a public dashboard and we can log in and find out which are the initiatives in the National Anti-Corruption Plan has been done so that we know the progress. Public administration, this is again repeated, bullet point 2, first sub point. Empower the KSN, Ketua Setiausaha Negara, Chief Secretary to the government, to be responsible for the successful delivery and implementation of the NACP goals. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, in the National Anti-Corruption Plan, there are a lot of initiatives. There are originally it was about 115 initiatives. After the midterm, there must be some correction, maybe 111 or something like that. Now, many of these will require action from the various agencies and ministries. Now, why we keep repeating to say the Chief Secretary to the government or the KSN must take charge, if he puts this in his KPI, automatically the Chief Secretaries in the various agencies, they will do their job. I don't know why it's so difficult. So we hope this message, the Prime Minister picks it up, and we hope that the role of GICC is maintained, because there were rumors that want to close down GICC and so on. We object to that because GICC is independent. They are policy makers. They are supposed to look after what is done and what is not done and so on. MACC's role is different. MACC is an enforcement agency. So their role is two separate roles. Huh? So I hope this will not happen, and I hope KSN take notes of it. Adopt International Standard on Integrity Pact. This is another initiative in the NACP. It says that we need to comply to international standard. Now, I don't know why, TI was the one who introduced the Integrity Pact to Malaysian government, but for some reason, the whole model of the Integrity Pact was hijacked, and they came with a different model where it's basically signing documents. The real Integrity Pact is you need to have independent oversight. The LCS fiasco wouldn't have happened if you had Integrity Pact the correct way, where you had an independent oversight, and this independent oversight, meaning that you have civil societies and all leading it, this problem wouldn't have happened. So we hope the government will re-look at it and don't claim that you have Integrity Pact. So the latest government circular, which was last year, failed to address this issue, despite the fact that TI had been discussing it with the Ministry of Finance. Mandate large mega projects must require parliamentary approval before commencing, and all supporting documents needs analysis. Cost-benefit reports are publicly available. Compel public officials found guilty of corruption to vacate their positions even while they exhaust their appeal process. Other recommendations: legislation to strengthen governance. As I said, Whistleblower Protection Act, provide wider reporting channels for the public and strengthen protection for whistleblowers. Election Offences Act 1954, include sanctions against corruption, because this is silent in the current act. MACC Act to include misconduct in public office, provision to hold public officials accountable for their actions. In fact, this MIPO provision didn't come from us. It came from MACC, and we are just supporting MACC. So I hope MACC can continue to push for this, and we can assure you, we will support you 100%. Get this amendment done on the MACC Act. Political Financing Act, I've talked about it. Money politics is still rampant, not only in general elections, state elections, party elections. So if we don't address this, I think some of you are familiar with TI. 13 years ago, we came with a book, Reforming Political Financing in Malaysia. And we haven't seen that. Huh? Procurement Act, we spoke about it. Ombudsman Act. We need an Ombudsman Act to enact an independent Ombudsman office with powers to sanction for the public to report wrongdoings and maladministration. Asset Declaration Act to compel politicians and high-ranking public officials to declare their assets and make it accessible to the public. And of course, we want the MACC to be strengthened. There must be separate funding for MACC operations approved by Parliament. They can manage their own administration and funds, mandate direct reporting to Parliament, and that will require some amendments to the MACC Act and the Federal Constitution. In fact, civil society, C4, Ideas, Bar Council, ourselves, we proposed in 2015. Nothing happened. Governance landscape, this is more for the media. Investigative journalism, this is still at a very infant stage. Journalists need protection to conduct investigative journalism through the strengthened Whistleblower Protection Act. And in line with the Prime Minister's call for public officials to report questionable decisions direct to him. And the last significant piece of investigative journalism was the Wang Kelian graves exposure in 2015. These are the Rohingyas who were found, murdered and buried in Wang Kelian. Now, this led to an RCI, Royal Commission of Inquiry. But let me tell you something. The report took so long to come out, and it is somewhere in the Ministry of Home Affairs website. In fact, I didn't know about it. Some journalists from Thailand called me and say that, are you aware that the report is there? I said, where shall I find? And I couldn't find. And they guided me to maneuver into the KDN's website, and it was somewhere at bottom. Why make it so difficult? Expose it, come and report it. And until today, there was no discussion about it, and questions remain. Were the main perpetrators ever caught, or how did they did escape monitoring by the authorities? So this is still unresolved. Local council elections, we used to have this in the 60s to deal with various governance issues that directly impact the Rakyat. They are integral part of the public sector delivery service. Having local elections directly enhances public governance. Without elections, appointing councillors, many of you live in different areas, Sepang, Subang Jaya, PJ, you know, the council, local council, the way these councillors are appointed is by the lawmakers. It is a sort of like rewarding the supporters. So let the Rakyat, the people in that community, they vote for it. All right, so we have that three level of government: local government, state government, federal government. Citizen participation can help improve transparency in the delivery service. And TI is also pushing for the Community Integrity Building, CIB, tool to enable citizens' participation. Looking forward. Now, we have a new government. They call it a unity government, or sometimes we call it coalition government. The Prime Minister's emphasis to practice good governance, transparency, integrity, democratic accountability. We hear this. Tata kelola yang baik, ketulusan, integrity, accountability in his administration gives fresh hope for Malaysia's fight against corruption. If we wish to see the CPI score improve, this must be translated into measurable action that produces the desired result. Okay, we are reaching 100 days. Enough of this talking. Now we want to see results. Of course, not every result will come. Please understand that it can take years, especially legislative reforms. But also one message I want to give to all Malaysians. While we have our leader showing commitment for reforms, governance, good governance, and so on, he cannot be left alone. Malaysians, civil societies, government officials, media, we all have to support to get this curve up again. All right? So it's going to be a collective effort, and we hope things can change. All right, so I think that's what I have, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding the CPI or anything else.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have the Q&A session. The floor will be open to all present. There is a mic in the middle of the hall. Kindly introduce yourself and your organization before asking your questions.
Please feel free to ask questions. I was waiting for questions. No questions? Media? Sure? Because this is your opportunity. Yesterday, a lot of people called me WhatsApp, phone, asking several questions about the current issues and so on. Tapi I said, come today, and then we will discuss. So please, I'll give you a few minutes. That is all. Sure. I'm very surprised. Maybe I have to ask you all a question, particularly media. Aren't you all not concerned that our score is going down and down and down? Or we have accepted the fact that no hope? No, there is hope. There is always hope. Okay, but we have to work towards that. Okay, the Secretariat will be distributing the press release. So it's in English and also Malay.
Sorry, you can put the results on.
Oh, results. You mean yang box tu?
The score tu. Belum. This one, yeah.
This one, huh? So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you're concerned, I'm very concerned. How to reverse this position? We have to do something. Yes, sir. Thank you for asking. I was really trying to get somebody. Please ask. Please ask. Come. Come to the mic.
Hi, Adil from Free Malaysia Today. So I just want to check, since for the first time the Malaysian government has formed the unity government, right? So how does TI see this? Will the corruption index score increase or decrease? Because you've mentioned earlier that previously the score dropped because of those 1MDB cases, right? And those were done during the Barisan Nasional government. So, and then you said the reform agenda dropped because of Sheraton move, that PH collapsed. So with both of these parties having the same government right now as a unity government, so how do you see the score index going for this 2023?
Okay, very good question. Of course, in paper it looks interesting. You have a leader, a prime minister, but don't forget, when it's a unity government, many of them have other issues. Some are on trial, they have court cases, but they're also in the cabinet. Okay? So, for the score to go up, you have to do work. Remember all those things I mentioned? You must do this reform, that reform. Kalau tak buat kerja, kalau you don't want to make any reform, you expect the score to go up. Just like school, you don't study, how are you going to pass and get good marks? To me, anything below 50 fail. Anything below 50 fail. Okay? So we are in that situation. We must go back to above 50. And believe me, if you analyze the scores and you compare with countries who have scores about 60, 62, 60, Okay, meaning which our score in 2019 was 53, right? If you just push up by another 8 points to 7 points, our rank will jump to about 30. This was what I mentioned here in my dialogue with the media here. And 2 days later, media asked a question to Tun. He was the Prime Minister then. And his response was, we cannot assure anything because we don't have a majority in Parliament. We are not sure of the reforms. We can't guarantee. So when you say like that, a leader, then where is the hope? All right. So answering your question, where will it go? They have to work. The government have to work. Now I want to carry on from what he has said. This analysis was over 2 years. Remember? Okay. Now, for Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim's government, unity government, he started in November, December. These scores were already tabulated by October. September, October, they already wrap up because they need to run, do the analysis and so on. So his role in this score is not there. In other words, he's not responsible for this. His test will come next January 2023 when we sit here. But to be fair to him, because it's a 2-year rolling assessment, the real assessment will come 2 years later, so 2025. But at least you can see some trend in the coming year. Tapi kena buat kerja lah. Kena buat immediately. You must take action. See? But if you don't take action, then don't forget, this is a perception index. Perception. So it depends what you do. See? If you take prompt action, like in 2020, the score went up because high-ranking, high-profile public officials were charged. The 1MDB case, the SRC case, other ministers, the former wife of the Prime Minister was charged, and so on. So that is the reason it actually pushed up perception. So if you don't have the right perception, then you are going to come next year and say why the score didn't go up, and put the blame on TI and saying that your methodology is wrong. Yeah, we have cases like that. Repeatedly we explain the methodology, yet people don't agree. All right? So I hope I have answered your question. Huh? Okay, please. Yes. Yes, Mrs. Asma, please.
Thank you so much, Doctor. It was very interesting. Don't you think that all the countries that you have mentioned, that they saw their score dropping down these past 2 years, it wasn't because of the heavy impact of the outbreak COVID-19? Because we spoke about the crisis, the conflict, etc. Of course, it impacts this aspect, but the sanitarian, worldwide sanitarian problem, it impacts and it aggravates as well this kind of corruption. So I think it's not highlighted as it should. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You're right, absolutely right. During last year's, when we present last year's, can someone help the mic? Just put it back. Izati, can you help? Okay. You're right. In fact, throughout the world, last year when we made the announcement, throughout the world, TI found that everybody's scores were going down. And one of the reasons is every country, because the suffering is not only in Malaysia, throughout the world, many people lost their jobs and things like that. So under the pretext of stimulus packages, many countries don't follow, like what I said, no parliamentary scrutiny. In Malaysia's case, they even suspended parliament. All right? So there was no proper parliamentary scrutiny, stimulus packages were rolled out. And even in Malaysia, as what the Prime Minister said, the investigations are still going on. I'm not going to comment on that. We don't know. According to him, the way the media has reported, during that stimulus package, there were a lot of abuse of power. Funds never really went to the right people. There were a lot of middle people siphoning out funds. And this has probably happened throughout the world, not only in Malaysia, everywhere. Unless your country has good governance system, you know, and so on. All right, so I agree that it has happened across the world. And that's one of the reasons scores have been going down. Any other questions?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, please.
I think the most obvious question nobody wants to ask is the appointment of
Nurul Izzah. What do you think?
Maybe you all didn't hear, okay? The question here is, what about the appointment of Nurul Izzah? Nurul Izzah is the daughter of the Prime Minister, all right? And I think last 2 days the media was flooded with these questions. And so you want my view on this?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, all right. Our view is this. When it's always a problem, just let me give you an example. There's issue of conflict of interest. Okay, and of course we say nepotism. It's just like in a company, we are all working. I'm a single guy. I like someone. I decide to get married to her. We are all in the same department. The moment we get married, we inform the company, officially we're married, maybe we invite a boss and so on. What the boss will do, he said, sorry, you can't work in the same department. There will be conflict of interest. So I transfer you to another department. Now in this particular case, it so happened that Nurul Izzah is a daughter of the Prime Minister. And the reason why the media and the public have raised a lot of concern is because the Prime Minister himself has said before, or spoke very much against cronyism, nepotism and all in the past. So, but when this is happening here now again, why did the Prime Minister appoint this? All right, so our view is, it gives a wrong signal, okay? It gives a wrong signal, and I'm afraid if it is not rectified, that will be factored in the perception here, because this is all perception. So the perception today is, cronyism have come back, nepotism has slipped in, and this is not good. But I'll give you another flip side of the story, okay? It so happened that this person is Nurul Izzah, and we all know who is Nurul Izzah. Nurul Izzah is a person of integrity, at least I know, from 2008 until 2022, until she lost elections. TI have engaged her in several forums and so on. And I personally has been asked a question in the PAC, Public Accounts Committee. She used to be a member. I was called up in Parliament 2 years ago to explain why in the Global Corruption Barometer, 71% of Malaysians feel that government corruption is a problem. So the PAC said, can you come and explain to us? It's very serious. So I went, and let me tell you something, because I had a first-hand experience. Of all the lawmakers who asked questions, she was the only one, I would say, very sharp and asked very good questions. Thank God I could answer the question. So Nurul Izzah as a person, she is very valuable to the country. It's just unfortunate that the father appoints her and becomes an issue. Maybe if it was another ministry who appointed her as a consultant, this problem wouldn't have happened. So to answer your question, yeah, it's definitely a concern. But in closing, I would just say that with so much hoo-ha in the media and so on, Prime Minister is not here. He is in Singapore. Hopefully when he comes back, he can look at this again and see whether he can do something about it. And maybe, redistribute or doesn't report to her. Because there will be conflict of interest. Another thing which the media, somebody wrote, and I support what has been written. You see, among Malaysians, we have one problem. We don't speak up. Bila ada something wrong, we keep to ourselves. But we are very good in making noise outside the gate, outside the door. After the meeting, this is no good, that no good, this is no good. In the meeting, don't want to talk. This will happen when Nurul is inside. The finance ministry officials, when they know something is wrong, they will always be afraid to tell the Prime Minister because it's the daughter's idea. This can happen. Kita manusia, we are human beings. So we have that, worry that the PM doesn't like something. So it will be a conflict of interest. But on the flip side of it, let's look at it positively. Because our PM is not someone who doesn't know things, He's been in the government, 3 years he has been fighting. And today he's the Prime Minister. He knows what he's doing. It gives me a signal, and this is my personal opinion. My feeling is he needs help. He desperately needs help for people to help him to go and get what is going on the ground and support him. So we can look at it whichever way and so on, but I hope the Prime Minister can intervene and do some adjustment, meaning that we don't lose her talent, but he don't get involved directly. Then this nepotism and conflict of interest doesn't surface. This is my view. But some correction need to be done. Okay, I hope this message goes to him. Okay, yes, we have a question. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Now the energy is coming back. Thank you, Mr. Rama. Yes.
Just a follow-up of your explanation on Nurul. As you rightly said, she's very dedicated, she's very loving, she's caring, and all that. But of course, it cannot be an advisor to the Prime Minister for obvious reasons. He could have definitely put her in a group, a think tank, where she's one of the members of the think tank. That would have started because her knowledge and experience is vital. She can channel that through a think tank that I think is good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rama. I share your view. She can join a group of experts. There are a lot of economists and financial experts in Malaysia, and she can be part of that group. So it become, that issue of conflict doesn't surface, and she cannot make that kind of decision. She can be part of the person who can be giving inputs, and not necessarily finance ministry, it can be the Ministry of Economy, and so on. But so that's the reason why I'm saying it's very easy to say nepotism, conflict of interest. I understand, and I also agree with that. But on the other hand, what is the reason behind? He needs somebody to probably help him. Of course, there are a lot of other people who can help him, but maybe he feels that she can also contribute. So he doesn't want to waste that talent. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, please. Ideal.
Alright, Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
From Kumpulan Wang Persaraan, KWAP. Doctor, would you agree that political will is the key here for Malaysia to have better rank in the future? Yes, we can see that Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim have made a strong statement that he will combat corruption during his tenure. But somehow, one person can't change the whole nation by his own, like you said. I'm just rhyming to say. But the other political wills by the other political leaders. For now, we only heard it from our Prime Minister. It should be rhymed by other political leaders as well. So a strong statement needs to be coming from their side as well, and to show that the commitment are there. If not, it will just lies on the words. Perhaps my second question will be, if we have time, would you be able to explain further those scores that we somehow lost in comparison with last year's score? From the 9th research or surveys that have been done here, yeah. So I understand that you have a few recommendations, but recommendation will be seen as recommendation if no action being taken to it. So in light of that recommendation, which from these 4 surveys will be the indicator for the next ranking. So can you somehow explain further how can we best for Malaysia to have a better score from the four survey that we have lost our marks?
Okay, first of all, let me address the first part, because that is very important. And I think all of you know the answer. When we say political will, it means that commitment. It shouldn't be something rhetoric. Yeah, so far, the Prime Minister keeps talking about good governance, transparency, integrity, accountability, but it must translate into action. All right? So I agree with you, only one man is talking, and the very good example is the LCS. What I said about LCS is, we are not interested to go and punish people. MACC could know what they are doing. Okay, if corruption is involved, they will handle it. Okay, but what we are saying is, where is the learning? You cannot sweep everything under the carpet. We all know, 9 billion project, 6 billion paid, not a single ship came, project cost overrun, or the project was not completed. So what happened? So a full investigation must be done and say that these are the things, mistakes have been done. Not with the intention to punish people, with the intention to say that we messed up here, here, here. In future, we will plug it by doing these things. Is this happening? It's not happening. Year after year, Auditor General's report, adverse report, 1.5 billion here, 1.5 billion there, next year another 1.5 billion here. Where is this going to stop? So if you ask me, is it going to improve? It will never improve if you don't work and you want to improve. So you need political will. Okay? Now, coming to the score here, of course, you do all those effort and reforms, the scores will go up. Now, I've explained about number 7 just now, an example of a question which relate to various agencies. They ask a question on public utilities, tax, annual tax payment. Do you pay a bribe? So people have scored and said they have paid a bribe and so on. Now, if you look at another score, maybe I take number 8, World Justice Project rule. That has a question whereby, to what extent in your country the government officials use public office for private gain? In other words, abuse of power, public officials. Now, you read the media every day, right? How many cases we hear of abuse of power in the public sector? No ending. And it has a lot of sub-indices. Government officials in the executive branch do not use public office for private gain. So you have to score there, okay? So of course, many of us who know many cases, you will score badly. Or government officials in the judicial branch do not use public office for private gain, and so on. Or government officials in the legislature do not use public office for private gain. These are the kind of questions that will be put in. So the more cases you have in the public sector of abuse of power and things like that, then you are not going to score better. All right? So those are the things. And then of course, we are also deeply concerned. This one happened about a year ago. Even within enforcement units, police, MACC, officials of MACC getting involved in robberies, or police getting involved in murders or things like that. So all these things doesn't go well. You are supposed to be the enforcement agency. You are supposed to protect the people, not work with criminals and so on. So all this has connection to corruption. All right? So we hope this cause can improve, but we have to do our homework. And I think the government have to play their part. And also, again, I repeat, don't leave alone to the Prime Minister alone. It's very unfair to him. I think we all have a responsibility. Civil society, media, expose them. You know. All right, I hope I've answered your question. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Maybe, oh, there is a question. Okay.
Hi.
Yeah.
I remember last year when we announced this call, there was the news from UCC saying that it's not factual or based on evidence, it's more like an indicator. I think it comes from the chief itself. And I know you did explain it in the press, but maybe you could just share it here again, following the consequences of this.
Okay, I mean, I'll just make it very simple. Remember I told you about the methodology. This is secondary data. It's not primary data. If you take the Global Corruption Barometer, that one is different. Sample size 1,000 to 2,000 is by tele-interview from Perlis to Johor Bahru, Kuching to Kota Kinabalu. The researcher will call based on the telephone directory and ask for opinion. And that's how we know that 71% Malaysians feel that corruption in government is a big problem. Okay, but the CPI is actually collecting data from secondary sources and putting everything together. And it's not only measuring corruption, it's also measuring freedom of expression, okay, human rights, and other things as well, as I gave you in the list. So it's an indicator, you know, it is not like you do a survey and you get a margin of error and things like that. So that is why people have to understand, it's an indicator that gives you a broad picture where we are going. Now, I would like to hear if anybody were to challenge that score I showed you just now. This one, our score went down again, right? 47. Can anybody stand up and say that, no, this one is wrong, it should have gone up last year? Can anyone say that? I don't think so. You and I know what is happening. Unless tangible reforms takes place. And this is a long journey, you know. I mean, we don't expect miracle. We can't be looking at a score of 60 or 70, but at least we need to take a turn. We cannot go on this. The easy way out is kajian ni tidak sah. That's the easiest way to say. and then say, don't look at the... What about when the score went up? The same guys who complained were the one who praised the CPI. The same guys who made the complaint are the ones who say, well, very good because the CPI went up. So you can't do it that way. Huh? So this is an indicator. It gives you a broad picture of where the country is going. And that's why just now when I showed you, very quickly before we end, you remember this? This is to indicate that we have other issues, threat, security issues. When you have leakages happening in our borders, people can come in and do what they want, you are inviting trouble. You have, I mean, Malaysia, we don't have terrorist kind of bombings or what, alhamdulillah. We don't have that problem. May God protect us. Right? But benda-benda macam ni, when you have leakages, people will just come. There are extremists everywhere, and once they find a way to come in, and that's it. So our borders must be protected and make sure no corruption. And I don't want to accuse anybody, but you all know from the media, even there is leakages. People come in, no record. No? How they came in? People overstay, bribery, pay through corruption, they can stay here without permit and so on. Foreign labor, don't say, how many illegals are around? Okay, I hope I have addressed your question. Any other questions? If not, we will have to end here. All right, so if there are no other questions, I want to thank all of you, and let's work together and see how we can get a better score next year, inshallah. Okay, Assalamu alaikum.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the release of the Corruption Perception Index 2022. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to once again express our sincerest gratitude to our honorable guests, members of the media, for gracing our event today. Your presence has been greatly appreciated. If you haven't already had lunch yet, food is still available on that side of the hall.
I stand there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you and have a pleasant day.
Dia orang keluar. Dia orang bangun dia. Dia belum keluar. Let them go.
Oh, you go first.